Before we begin this incredible story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. What you are about to hear is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of hope in the darkest circumstances. This is a story that will stay with you long after you finish watching. Steve Harvey has built a career on making people laugh, on finding joy in everyday moments, and on celebrating families from all walks of life. Over his decades in television, he has interviewed thousands of contestants, heard countless stories, and witnessed more human emotion than most people experience in a lifetime. But nothing in his extensive career prepared him for what he would hear from a quiet 52-year-old woman named Margaret Chen on a Tuesday afternoon in April 2024. The Family Feud stage was as bright and energetic as always. The Chen family from Sacramento, California stood ready to compete against the Williams family from Atlanta, Georgia. Margaret Chen stood slightly behind her adult children, her posture humble and reserved in a way that suggested someone who had spent a lifetime trying not to take up too much space. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands clasped nervously in front of her. There was something in her eyes, a depth of experience that spoke of a life lived with quiet strength and unspoken struggles. What the studio audience could not have known, what even her own children had only learned in fragments over the years, was the journey that had brought Margaret to this moment. The truth about her childhood was not something she spoke about easily. It was not something she wore as a badge of honor or used to gain sympathy. It was simply the foundation upon which she had built a life of dignity, service, and unwavering commitment to ensuring that her children would never know the hunger and fear that had defined her earliest years. Margaret was born in rural China in 1972, during a time of extreme poverty and political upheaval. Her parents were farmers in a small village in Guangdong province, working land that barely produced enough to feed the family. She was the fourth of 6 children, born into circumstances where each new mouth to feed was both a blessing and a burden that strained already scarce resources to their breaking point. Her earliest memories were of hunger, not the temporary discomfort of waiting for dinner, but the constant, gnawing emptiness that never quite went away. The kind of hunger that makes a child dizzy, that turns schoolwork into an impossible task, that makes sleep difficult because the stomach aches too much. Her family ate twice a day when they were fortunate. Rice with vegetables, sometimes a small piece of salted fish shared among 8 people. On bad days, which came more often than good ones, they ate rice porridge so thin you could see through it, flavored with nothing more than a pinch of salt. Education was considered a luxury in her village, particularly for girls. Margaret attended school sporadically, walking 5 miles each way when her parents could spare her from farm work. She had one dress that she washed every night and wore again the next day. Her shoes were made from tire rubber and cloth scraps that her mother had sewn together. When it rained, she went barefoot to preserve them. She carried her books in a plastic bag that had once held fertilizer, and she wrote with pencil stubs worn down so short they were difficult to hold. But Margaret had something that poverty could not take away. She had a mind that absorbed information like dry earth absorbs rain. Her teachers noticed immediately that this quiet, undernourished girl could solve mathematics problems in her head that other students struggled with on paper. She memorized passages after reading them once. She asked questions that revealed a deep curiosity about how the world worked beyond the boundaries of their small village. Her teachers began saving their own meager resources to help her. They gave her their old books. They stayed after school to tutor her. They saw in her what she could not yet see in herself, the potential for a life beyond the rice paddies and chronic hunger. When Margaret was 12 years old, her parents made a decision that would change her life forever. They could not afford to feed all 6 children properly. They could not send them all to school. They had to make an impossible choice. After months of agonizing deliberation, they arranged for Margaret to go live with her uncle in Guangzhou, a city several hundred miles away. Her uncle worked in a garment factory and had agreed to take her in, not out of generosity, but with the understanding that she would earn her keep. The day Margaret left her village, she carried everything she owned in a cloth sack. One dress, one pair of shoes, her school books, and a small photograph of her family. Her mother cried and pressed a handful of coins into her palm, money they could not afford to give but could not bear not to give. Her father, a man of few words who had been hardened by years of backbreaking work and disappointment, hugged her for the first time she could remember and whispered words that would echo in her mind for the rest of her life. "Study hard. Make something of yourself. Do not come back unless you can do better than we did. Life in Guangzhou was not the escape from hardship that a 12-year-old girl might have hoped for. Her uncle put her to work immediately in the factory where he was employed. She worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, sewing buttons and hemming garments in a crowded, poorly ventilated room alongside dozens of other workers. The factory conditions were harsh. The air was thick with fabric dust that made her cough. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly and gave her headaches. The repetitive motion of sewing caused her young hands to cramp and ache, but Margaret had made a promise to herself. She would continue her education no matter what it took. She enrolled in night school, attending classes from 7 in the evening until 10 at night after her factory shifts ended. She studied by streetlight when her uncle turned off the apartment lights to save electricity. She did her homework during her lunch break at the factory, balancing textbooks on her lap while eating rice from a metal container. She slept 5 hours a night and never complained. Her uncle was not cruel, but he was not kind either. He provided a place to sleep and basic meals in exchange for most of her factory wages. He viewed her continued schooling as a waste of time and resources. What good would mathematics and literature do for a poor village girl destined to work in factories her entire life? He told her this often, reminding her that she should be grateful for the opportunity to work, that many children had far worse situations. Margaret listened without arguing, but she never stopped attending her night classes. She never stopped believing that education was her path to something better. When Margaret was 16, she took the high school equivalency examination. She scored in the top 1% of all test takers in Guangdong province. This achievement, remarkable for any student but extraordinary for a factory worker with only sporadic formal education, earned her a scholarship to a technical college in Beijing. It was an opportunity that came once in a lifetime, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her family for generations. But accepting it meant leaving everything familiar behind once again, moving to a city where she knew no one, and surviving on a scholarship that would cover tuition, but little else. Margaret went to Beijing with the same cloth sack she had carried from her village 4 years earlier. She arrived at the college with the equivalent of $15 in her pocket, everything she had managed to save from her factory wages after sending money home to her parents. She found work cleaning offices at night to pay for food and a shared room in a dormitory basement. She ate 1 meal a day, usually rice with pickled vegetables bought from street vendors. She studied with an intensity born from knowing that failure was not an option, that this was her only chance to break free from poverty. Her dedication paid off. She graduated at the top of her class with a degree in computer science in 1993, just as China was beginning to modernize and international companies were seeking educated workers. She secured a position with an American technology company that had opened an office in Shanghai. The salary was modest by American standards, but represented wealth beyond anything her family had known. For the first time in her life, Margaret could eat 3 meals a day. She could buy new clothes instead of wearing hand-me-downs or factory discards. She could send money home to her parents that allowed them to finally repair their house and ensure her younger siblings could attend school without interruption. In 1998, the company transferred Margaret to their headquarters in California. She arrived in Sacramento on a work visa, carrying 2 suitcases and speaking limited English. America was overwhelming in ways she had not anticipated. The abundance of food in grocery stores made her cry the first time she went shopping. The casual waste she witnessed, food thrown away that could have fed her entire village for a week, was difficult for her to comprehend. The ease with which people took for granted things she had struggled her entire life to attain, education, healthcare, security, was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Margaret worked hard and advanced steadily in her career. She met her husband Daniel, a software engineer at a company training seminar. They married in 2001 and had 3 children, Jessica, Michael, and Sophie. Margaret became an American citizen in 2005, a moment of pride that brought tears to her eyes as she took the oath of allegiance. She had achieved what her parents had told her to achieve. She had made something of herself. She had done better than they did. But success did not erase the memories of hunger. Even after decades of financial security, Margaret could not throw away food. She saved every leftover, repurposed every scrap. She bought clothes on clearance and wore them until they were beyond repair. She turned off lights obsessively to save electricity. Her children, who had never known poverty, sometimes found their mother's habits confusing. They did not understand why she became upset when they left food on their plates, or why she insisted they finish every bite before getting up from the table. They did not know about the hungry child their mother had been, about the nights she had gone to bed with an aching stomach, about the shame of wearing the same dress every day, or the exhaustion of working 10-hour shifts at 12 years old. Now, standing on the Family Feud stage at 52 years old, Margaret found herself in an unexpected position. Her daughter Jessica had applied for the show as a fun family activity, thinking it would be a nice experience for everyone to share. They had won the main game through a combination of luck and good answers. Margaret had participated quietly, deferring to her more outgoing children and husband, content to support rather than take center stage. But now they were in the bonus round, and it was Margaret's turn to answer the questions. Steve Harvey approached her with his characteristic warmth and humor. He could sense her nervousness and tried to put her at ease. "Margaret, you have been so quiet all game. Now it is your time to shine. Are you ready?" Margaret nodded, her hands still clasped tightly in front of her. "Before we start," Steve continued, "tell me a little about yourself." "What do you do?" "I am a software engineer," Margaret replied softly, her slight accent becoming more pronounced with her nervousness. "I have worked in technology for 30 years. Steve smiled. 30 years in tech, that is impressive, especially for a woman in that field. "Where did you grow up?" "China," Margaret said. "I came to America in 1998. Steve was about to move on to the game when something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way Margaret held herself, with a dignity that spoke of hard-won strength. Perhaps it was something in her eyes that hinted at stories left untold. "What made you want to become an engineer?" he asked, genuinely curious. The question was simple, but for Margaret the answer required opening doors she had kept closed for years. She took a breath, and then the words began to flow. "When I was a little girl in China, I was very poor. My family were farmers. We did not have much food. Many nights I went to bed hungry. I wore the same dress every day. I walked 10 miles to school with no shoes because I wanted to save them. When I was 12, my parents sent me away to live with my uncle because they could not feed all of us. I worked in a factory for many years while going to night school. I wanted to learn. I wanted to have a better life. Engineering gave me that chance." The studio had gone completely quiet. Steve Harvey, known for his quick wit and constant banter, stood motionless, his usual smile fading as he absorbed what Margaret had just shared. The audience, expecting a lighthearted game show experience, found themselves confronted with a reality most of them had never encountered. Margaret continued, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "My children, they do not know this story, not all of it. They know I came from China, but they do not know what it meant to be hungry every day. To work in a factory at 12 years old. To study by streetlight because there was no electricity. I never told them because I wanted them to have a childhood without fear, without knowing what it means to wonder if there will be food tomorrow. But I think about that little girl every day. The one who was hungry and scared, but who never stopped believing she could have more. Coming to this show, winning this money, it is not about the money. It is about showing that little girl that she made it. That she did what her father told her to do, she made something of herself." Tears were streaming down Steve Harvey's face. He made no attempt to hide them or wipe them away. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Margaret, I do not even know what to say to you. In all my years of doing this show, I have never heard anything like this. You are standing here, successful with a beautiful family, and you still carry that little girl inside you. That takes strength I cannot even imagine." Margaret's children were crying now, seeing their mother in a completely new light. Her daughter Jessica stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Margaret. "Mom, I had no idea. Why did you never tell us?" Margaret touched her daughter's face gently. "Because you did not need to carry that weight. I carried it so you would not have to. But maybe it is time for you to know, to understand why I am the way I am, why I cannot waste food, why I work so hard, why I want you to appreciate everything you have." Steve composed himself enough to continue. "Margaret, we are going to play this game. We are going to try to win this money. But I want you to know that you have already won. You won the moment you decided that poverty would not define your future. You won when you walked 10 miles to school barefoot. You won when you studied by streetlight. You won when you came to a new country and built a life for yourself and your family. You are a winner, Margaret Chen. The game is just a formality." The questions began. Margaret answered each one with quiet focus, drawing on a lifetime of determination and resilience. "Name something people are afraid of." "Poverty," she said without hesitation. Survey said, "Number 3 answer, 28 points. "Name something you do when you are grateful." Say thank you. Number 1 answer, 42 points. Name something children need. Education. Number 1 answer, 39 points. By the time the round ended, Margaret had scored 173 points, one of the highest individual scores of the season. But the points hardly mattered anymore. What mattered was the moment that had just occurred, the breaking down of walls, the sharing of truth, the honoring of a journey that deserved to be acknowledged. Steve Harvey hugged Margaret tightly, and when he pulled back, his eyes were red. You just taught me something today, he said. You taught everyone watching something. Success is not about where you end up. It is about how far you travel to get there. And Margaret, you have traveled farther than most people can imagine. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was extraordinary. The clip of Margaret sharing her story went viral within hours. Major news outlets picked up the story. Immigration advocates used her experience as an example of the strength and determination of immigrants. Education organizations highlighted her journey as proof of why access to learning can transform lives. Business leaders invited her to speak at conferences about resilience and perseverance. But perhaps the most meaningful responses came from ordinary people. Thousands of immigrants wrote to Margaret sharing their own stories of hardship and triumph. Parents wrote about how her story had helped them explain to their American-born children why certain values mattered so much. Teachers used the clip in classrooms to inspire students facing their own challenges. Food banks and hunger relief organizations reported increased donations from people who said Margaret's story had made them realize how many children in America still went to bed hungry. Margaret's relationship with her children deepened in ways she had not anticipated. With the truth finally out in the open, they began asking questions. They wanted to know about her childhood, about her parents, about the journey that had brought her to America. Margaret, who had spent decades protecting them from her painful past, found that sharing those stories actually brought them closer together. Her children gained a new appreciation for the sacrifices she had made and the strength she had demonstrated. Her daughter Jessica started a nonprofit organization called Full Plates, dedicated to fighting childhood hunger both in the United States and internationally. The organization was inspired directly by learning about her mother's experience of going to bed hungry night after night as a child. Within 2 years, Full Plates was providing meals to thousands of children in underserved communities and funding educational programs in rural China similar to the ones that had helped Margaret escape poverty. Steve Harvey remained deeply affected by his encounter with Margaret. In interviews, he often referenced her story as one of the most powerful moments in his career. He established a scholarship program through his foundation, specifically for first-generation immigrant students pursuing degrees in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The scholarship was named in Margaret's honor, and she served on the selection committee, helping to identify students whose determination and circumstances reminded her of her younger self. Margaret used a portion of the money from Family Feud to return to China for the first time in over a decade. She brought her children with her to visit the village where she had been born. She showed them the fields her parents had farmed, the school she had walked miles to attend, the simple house where 6 children had shared 2 rooms. She introduced them to relatives they had never met and told stories she had never shared. Her children, who had grown up with every advantage, stood in that village and truly understood for the first time the magnitude of their mother's journey. But perhaps the most poignant moment of that trip came when Margaret visited her childhood school. The building had been renovated and expanded with donations from successful former students, but the dedication plaque honored the teachers who had stayed late to tutor a hungry girl who dreamed of more. Margaret stood in front of that plaque and wept, remembering the kindness of educators who had seen potential in a child that poverty had tried to hide. She established a fund to provide meals and supplies for current students, ensuring that no child would have to choose between eating and learning the way she once had. 3 years after her appearance on Family Feud, Margaret was invited to speak at a technology industry conference about diversity and inclusion. She had given talks before, professional presentations about software development and project management. But this time she was asked to share her personal story, to talk about how a poor farm girl from rural China had become a successful engineer in Silicon Valley. Standing before hundreds of technology leaders, Margaret told the same truth she had shared with Steve Harvey. She spoke about hunger and sacrifice, about determination and hope, about the teachers who believed in her, and the parents who made impossible choices. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But what moved Margaret most was what happened afterward. Dozens of people approached her, many of them immigrants themselves, sharing their own stories of hardship and perseverance. A man from Vietnam told her about working in rice paddies as a child. A woman from Ethiopia described walking hours each day to fetch water for her family. A young man from Syria spoke about studying in refugee camps. Each of them had faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Each of them had refused to let circumstances define their future. Each of them saw in Margaret's story a reflection of their own journey. Margaret realized that her silence about her past, while motivated by a desire to protect her children, had also prevented her from connecting with others who might have drawn strength from her experience. She began speaking more openly, not to seek sympathy or praise, but to remind people that success stories often begin with struggle, that the American dream is real but rarely easy, and that the obstacles we overcome become the foundation of our strength. Steve Harvey invited Margaret back to Family Feud 2 years after her original appearance for a special Champions episode. This time, she brought her parents, who had come to America for the first time to see their daughter honored on national television. Her father, now in his 70s and still bearing the weathered hands of a lifetime of farm work, sat in the audience with tears streaming down his face as Steve Harvey told the studio audience about Margaret's journey from their small village to success in America. When Steve brought Margaret's parents on stage, her father spoke through a translator. He said he had told his daughter to make something of herself, to do better than he had done. He had meant for her to have enough to eat, perhaps to finish school, maybe to avoid the backbreaking labor that had defined his life. He had never imagined she would travel to the other side of the world, master a new language, build a career in a field he did not understand, and raise children who would never know hunger. She did not just do better than me, he said, his voice breaking. She did better than I could dream. I sent away a scared little girl because I could not feed her. She came back a woman who feeds thousands through her daughter's organization. That is not my legacy, that is hers. The impact of Margaret's story continued to ripple outward in ways both large and small. Teachers used her experience in lesson plans about perseverance and the importance of education. Immigration attorneys shared her story with clients who were struggling to adjust to life in a new country. Career counselors used her journey as an example of how determination and education can overcome poverty. Parents read about her to their children at bedtime, turning her real-life experience into a modern parable about hard work and hope. But Margaret herself remained humble about her story. When people called her inspirational, she would shake her head and say she simply did what she had to do to survive, and then to build a better life. What choice did I have, she would ask. I could accept poverty as permanent, or I could fight for something more. Any person would have done the same. But those who heard her speak knew that many people faced with similar circumstances did not persevere the way Margaret had. Many gave up when the obstacles seemed too great. Many accepted their situations as unchangeable. Margaret's refusal to surrender to circumstance, her unwavering belief that education and hard work could change her destiny, was indeed extraordinary. 5 years after that transformative moment on Family Feud, Margaret published a memoir titled The Hungry Years. The book detailed her childhood, her journey to America, and the lessons she had learned about resilience, sacrifice, and hope. All proceeds from the book went to Full Plates, her daughter's organization fighting childhood hunger. The book became a bestseller, not because of dramatic storytelling or scandalous revelations, but because of its honest, understated account of what poverty really looks like and what it takes to escape it. Readers found themselves moved by the simple details. The way Margaret described the taste of the first apple she ever ate, purchased with money from her first real paycheck. The shame she felt wearing the same dress every day and trying to keep it clean. The exhaustion of working 10-hour factory shifts at 12 years old while trying to stay awake in night school. The joy she experienced upon learning she had been accepted to college, knowing it meant a chance for a different future. The fear she felt arriving in America alone, carrying 2 suitcases, and speaking broken English. The pride of becoming a citizen. The overwhelming gratitude of being able to provide for her children in ways her parents could never provide for her. Margaret's story demonstrated that the American dream, often criticized as outdated or unattainable, remained possible for those willing to make extraordinary sacrifices to achieve it. Her success was not handed to her. She worked for every single achievement, often while hungry, exhausted, and afraid. But she never stopped working. She never stopped learning. She never stopped believing that her circumstances could change if she refused to accept them as permanent. When asked what she wanted people to take away from her story, Margaret's answer was always the same. I want people to understand that childhood poverty is not a character flaw or a choice. It is a circumstance that millions of children face through no fault of their own. But I also want people to know that poverty does not have to be permanent. Education changes lives. Kindness matters. Teachers who stay late to help struggling students change the course of history. And parents who make impossible sacrifices for their children create legacies that last for generations. Steve Harvey often reflected on the day Margaret shared her truth on his show. He said it changed how he approached every interview, every conversation with contestants. He began listening more carefully for the stories beneath the surface, the struggles that people carried quietly, the journeys that had brought them to that stage. Margaret taught me that everyone has a story, he said in interviews. Everyone has overcome something. Our job is not to judge or dismiss, but to listen and honor the paths people have walked. As this remarkable story demonstrates, sometimes the most powerful moments in life come from simple honesty about the struggles we have faced and the strength we have found. Margaret Chen did not set out to inspire millions when she stepped onto that Family Feud stage. She simply answered a question truthfully, sharing a past she had long kept hidden. But in that moment of vulnerability, she created something far more valuable than a game show victory. She reminded the world that behind every success story is a journey of sacrifice, that poverty can be overcome but is never truly forgotten, and that the hungry child you once were never completely leaves you, no matter how far you travel or how much you achieve. If this story moved you the way it moved Steve Harvey and millions of viewers around the world, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of resilience, hope, and the triumph of the human spirit. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their circumstances do not define their future, that hard work and education can change lives, and that the struggles we overcome become the foundation of our greatest strengths. Margaret Chen's journey from a hungry child in rural China to a successful engineer in America is proof that the American dream, while never easy, remains achievable for those willing to work for it with unwavering determination and unshakable hope.